This episode is brought to you by Hyundai. Think you know what an electric vehicle should be? Think again. From the charge time and range in the Ioniq 5 and 6 to the 601 horsepower Ioniq 5N, Hyundai is redefining what EVs should be. Learn more about Hyundai EVs at HyundaiUSA.com. EPA estimated 303-mile driving range for 2024 Ioniq 5 SE SEL limited rear-wheel drive and 361-mile driving range for 2024 Ioniq 6 SE long-range rear-wheel drive with fully charged battery. Actual range may vary.
You're listening to the Brutally Delicious Podcast. Brutal!
The Brutally Delicious Podcast. The Brutally Delicious Podcast. The Brutally Delicious Podcast. The Brutally Delicious Podcast.
Welcome.
Excellent.
Thank you for taking the time. I guess the best way to do this, let's start by, for those not familiar with Frank Meyer, can you give us like the 2-sentence elevator pitch?
Sure. I'm a musician, author, and filmmaker. Musically, I'm most known for my longtime LA punk rock and roll band, the Streetwalkin Cheetahs. I also in a band called Trading Aces. It's based in Europe. I have a solo career, and I've done a bunch of work with folks like Eddie Spaghetti from the Super Suckers and James Williamson of the Stooges. And since you're wearing a Destruction shirt, I'll mention, and the Mighty Thor. I've played with Thor off and on for years.
Nice.
But I also have directed 3 documentary films and have a deep, background in film and TV and digital production. And I've written 8 books, all published.
So a few accomplishments.
A few.
Yeah, just a few. That's wonderful. So one of my questions was then, how do you think your background in filmmaking influences the visual storytelling in Baby Dynamite?
A lot. I mean, in general, movies are my other passion besides music. So a lot of times when I'm writing a song, I'm kind of thinking about what kind of movie it is. Everything from the title to just sort of like the momentum and the tempo and just, what is this, an indie film? Is this an action film? Is this a horror film? What's going on? And so I tend to write stuff that's a little cinematic anyways. And since I'm also a director and I direct for a lot of other artists, but when I'm doing my own videos, I often direct them. Occasionally others have directed me and stuff. But usually I have a pretty clear vision of what I want the visuals to look like. And I usually have kind of a few reference points. So I can go into the video since I'm already so familiar with the music, obviously, since I wrote it and performed it, and have a real strong sense of how to pull off sort of what I'm seeing. As far as Baby Dynamite goes, there's an indie movie called Bellflower that is about this sort of love triangle that ends really violently. And in the movie, they're all super nerding out on building a flamethrower and building a replica of the Interceptor, I think it's called, from Mad Max and Road Warrior, Mel Gibson's car and that. So it's a sort of love story with lots of like flamethrowers and crazy future kill cars. So when I was doing the video for Baby Dynamite, that was kind of my visual reference point, was that movie Bellflower and something along those lines.
Does that happen with most of your songs then? So are you thinking already like the visual and tying it into a film in your head? Or
I'm not necessarily thinking in terms of like every song needs a music video, meaning it's not as linear as that in the sense of kind of seeing it, so clearly like that. But I would definitely say that when I'm writing songs, I'm generally kind of in my head thinking about like, I don't know, when I write songs, it's like, part of it is this aspect of like, okay, well, this song's going to be like, what if Cheap Trick and Amy Winehouse wrote a song together? Or what if like the Allman Brothers meets Aerosmith rocks? I kind of in my head have these like comparisons of what if I took a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, stirred it up, and that's the song. And I'm also usually thinking a little visually like that. Like if I write, kind of an action-packed song like on this record, Partners in Crime, which is me and Eddie Spaghetti kind of doing a duet. And in that song, I was thinking like, okay, what if Eddie and I robbed a bank and we'd be shooting it up and someone would take one and be fucking, going out all bloody, holding sacks of money, and we'd be shooting cops, and then we'd get in a car and go down to Mexico like Thelma and Louise and be running for the line, or sheer death. So when I'm writing a song like that, I'm thinking about like, oh, it's kind of like Thelma and Louise meets Tarantino, if I'm writing a love song or something more sensitive, maybe I'm not being so visual and I'm going a little bit more for the heart, or my own experiences. But if I'm writing something that's kind of big and more of a fantasy type song, then yeah, I'm usually kind of thinking about like what kind of movie would this be?
What kind of challenges did you face directing and performing in the video?
Well, one of any great, leader's strengths, when you're directing a music video or directing anything, you're kind of the leader, is having a team of equally talented people, or hopefully more talented people that know and are experts at all the things that you're not necessarily. Because I'm a multitasker to some extent, but I also realize like I can't do everything, and I got to have good people around me who know what they're doing and know how I work, and we can complement each other. So, for instance, one of my main director of photography, who also is a camera op on a lot of the stuff I work on, and therefore serves as sort of a cinematographer, is this gal named Sarah Remitt. She came from Suicide Girls. She's directed documentary films and stuff. I met her along the way when I was working at Fender, actually directing digital content there. And she's just great. And it's like we speak the same language. We both come from punk rock. We both love horror movies. We kind of can finish each other's sentences. And also, she's great because she brings in a different sensibility. You know what I mean? She's a woman and I'm a man, so we might look at a certain scene a little differently. It gives me an idea to get a good sort of temperature on the room on stuff. She's just got like the same but different sensibilities about things. And since I often am doing stuff where I'm working with actors and actresses and stuff, it's great to have someone who also is a performer. Like she was doing her own performing and stuff, so she has a good gauge on reading the room and helping me read the room and the actors, and she's just a great. So meaning anytime when I got someone like Sarah who's so multi-talented herself, I'm in front of the camera, but I'm in back of the camera, and then when I need to be in front, I just hand it off to her and like, you're in charge now, and you just tell me what to do because now I'm a talent. You're the director, so you're in charge.
So how does the theme of toxic masculinity, I guess in Baby Dynamite, how does that meld with what we're talking about, like the punk rock ethos and the horror stuff? How did that come about?
I mean, the song itself was written actually about my daughter, and she is now 21, but when she was younger, we used to hang out a lot, obviously, because she was younger and she lived with me. And we would go to this restaurant kind of near our house where they had this countertop, and we would sit there, and she'd have like her, whatever, pancakes and milk and orange juice or whatever. And I'd have like, they had these great white wine sangrias, and I'd be ordering French fries and a burger and stuff. And we would hang out and talk to the staff and the people that worked there. And eventually she developed a passion for cooking, and they would let her come back in the like with all the line chefs and line cooks, and the chef would sort of teach her stuff, and then they ended up hiring her when she was like 11 years old to be a server and stuff, not at the normal stuff, but like special events and stuff. So I was just watching her kind of like grow into this like little badass and just taking on all these accomplishments and doing all this very mature stuff for an 11-year-old. And I kind of was just like, I'm sitting there drinking my the opening line of the song said, red raspberries taste so divine. I had red raspberries in my white wine sangria, and I'm looking at my kid going, man, this kid's just going to take on the world, So Baby Dynamite was kind of me writing a bit of an homage to my talented, badass daughter, and knew that she was going to grow up to be this firecracker, i.e. Baby Dynamite was my way of sort of saying a little firecracker. When I got time to do the video, I didn't necessarily think that all of that was going to translate into a particularly great music video, because while that's a fun, personal, touching moment, I was thinking a little bigger and broader about like what else could the song mean. And because of all the sort of references to the fuse and set the town alight and all these sort of like explosive references in the song in relation to my daughter, but in the song the protagonist, my mind started going like, well, what if I had like a cool chick, like a Ripley from Aliens, kind of badass, and what if she had a flamethrower, and what would she be, using that flamethrower? What if like guys are like hitting on her and she can't even get down the street without being relentlessly hit on, which in Los Angeles or the whole world is kind of what women face every single day. And so I started kind of thinking it would be fun to write this piece. And like I said, the movie Bellflower was a bit of a visual inspiration where you kind of watch this girl take a few punches and then just come back with a flamethrower and blow everything. Of course, she doesn't take literal punches, but just sort of like society being like sexist and a bunch of jerks and stuff, and she destroys them all.
So I saw somewhere this is the part one of the video. So this is going to be a series or just a follow up, or where does this go?
The second one came out this week. It's called Blue Radio, and it's the second advanced single off the album. And in the song itself is not necessarily a direct sequel, like lyrically or anything. It's a different story. But the video is. So essentially at the end of Baby Dynamite, after she, sets fire to all these jerks, she finally meets like a sweet guy and they walk off kind of in the sunset. In the next video, they're now a couple and they're at like a carnival, and a evil magician, me, gives them this blue radio, like pulls it out of a hat. And then you kind of cut to this montage of them with the blue radio, listening to music, being cute, being in love. And then she suddenly explodes because she's Baby Dynamite. She was just too good to be true. So she explodes and he's now super bummed out, gazing at the blue radio, thinking about his love lost. He passes out and imagines her coming back as an angel and kind of says, well, I don't have to be dead if you don't want. So he wakes up and climbs up on a hill and plants the blue radio and in the dirt and waters it, and she's resurrected and comes out of the ground, and they kind of finally get to walk and have their real moment, walk into the sunset. Love rules.
That's a great story.
Yeah. So in this, the song itself is
Make your next move with American Express Business Platinum. Enjoy complimentary access to the American Express Global Lounge Collection, and with a welcome offer of 150,000 points after you spend $20,000 on purchases on the card within your first 3 months of membership, your business can soar to new heights. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum. Amex Business Platinum. Built for business by American Express.
Those old like girl band 50s songs, like Leader of the Pack and Remember Walking in the Sand, all like the Shangri-Las and the Ronettes, and all those songs would be these like tragic love stories. You know what I mean? It'd be like, my boy, he's such a badass. I love him so much. He's so boss. He's so cool. Look at him in his cool leather jacket. And then, he drove his motorcycle off a cliff and he's dead. And then the rest of the song's like, I love him so, So I was kind of thinking of Blue Radio in that tradition, and the video plays into that to some extent, which is this idea of like, a guy wins a girl, blue radio at a carnival, somehow she dies tragically, and he's just sort of forever haunted and listening to the blue radio and thinking about their love lost. So that was the overall inspiration for the video too. I just kind of went into more detail with the video. The song's a little bit more almost like a cute little poem or something.
I love it. You have like endless creativity, it seems.
Well, I think a lot of, I am a creative person, and a lot of it is that I'm good at following things through. I know a lot of creative people, but like their best stuff stays on their hard drive or in their phone or in a studio where no one hears it. I'm pretty good at like, if I've got a good idea or a band or a project or a movie or a book or whatever, if I think it's worth me putting the time and energy into, then it's worth seeing through, finishing it, and having it released in some sort of.
So can I stay there for a second then? What's the criteria for you to decide? Because obviously, you're comparing it to other people who don't, hold things back, but how do you know, like, or do you just pursue every angle and see what pans out?
It kind of depends on the format, I guess, in the sense, I would say, for instance, music is my all-time passion. That is really what I love to do. And I'm lucky right now, because right now I'm playing in 6 functioning touring bands simultaneously and touring constantly, to the extent where, with the exception of directing some music videos, and I've got sort of these little freelance regular gigs that I do, but for the most part, with the exception of like some freelance directing work that I still get, my entire job now is playing music, playing guitar in some bands, singing, being the front man in other bands. So that's like a really lucky place for me to be. But it took a lot of hard work, and a lot of it was kind of prioritizing. So for me, music was always my number one. But when I was younger, I had nothing else to do but just go hard on the music. So, I used to, when the early days of the Streetwalkin Cheetahs, when I was a younger man, before I was a father and stuff, I just toured constantly and lived the life of a gypsy, essentially. At some point, as I got married, I had kids, the Cheetahs broke up at one point. That plan didn't seem so sustainable. So I found my way into other facets of show business, directing, writing, and those for a long time were paying better. So, for instance, getting back to your question, when it comes to books, I never set out to be an author. I was a writer. I was a journalism major, but I was mainly doing journalism style writing, writing for like LA Weekly and New Times and Hollywood Reporter and Variety and, stuff like Billboard and stuff, writing for like trade magazines and doing interviews with, celebrities or whatever. It was only because I got divorced and essentially needed about 20 G's more a year in order to stay in my house. And some other things happened along those lines, but basically all of a sudden I was like, how much can you get for a book advance? And so I started working on writing like a book every year or two to provide me with that extra income. The first book I did, the Ramones book, kind of fell in my lap through some mutual connections, but then I wasn't thinking about doing more books. It was just this one Ramones book, but it did really well. Suddenly I had an agent, I had the opportunity, and then I get divorced and suddenly need to make more money each year. So I was like, yes, this book thing seems like it might.
Right.
Yeah. So that one was more like necessity. And then after writing like 8 books, at some point I kind of was like, enough. Like, it's a lot of work. Nonfiction stuff, it's a lot of work. It's like writing a giant research paper, and I was spending every second doing it that I wasn't already playing music and a day job and being a father. So at some point I just kind of said, okay, I'm done with writing books. With movies, it's sort of a similar thing in the sense that I was working at a TV network and I was already directing a lot of content, and found myself in an opportunity where I was interviewing a lot of hip hop artists, and I have a real passion for hip hop music as well. And so, it's sort of a really long story. I'll make really short. Basically, on one hand, I started directing this podcast that I came up with called Freestyle 101, and I directed over like 110 episodes of every rapper in the world talking about this concept of like freestyling versus writing. And then I talked the network into giving me a budget to make a documentary film out of that. Then the network got canceled, essentially, and I ended up with my partner having to wait it out and then buy back the footage and then finish that movie on our own. That movie is called Freestyle 101 Hip Hop History. It's narrated by Chuck D. It stars Ice-T, Mobb Deep, Cypress Hill, M.O.P., Fat Joe, Del Funky Homo Sapien, Tech Nine, everyone talking about this stuff, and lots of cool performances too. While I was doing that, which was like my day job, the podcast part was part of my day job at NBC, but all the other stuff was me kind of taking advantage of that day job and like, ooh, there's some other stuff going on here. A rapper that I was good friends with, this guy Hellraiser, who I'd actually knew for years before all this stuff, he's a Wu-Tang Clan affiliate. He was on my show and was a guy I was working with, making music with, doing cool stuff with, and he had a brain aneurysm and lost the whole left side of his body and spent years in recovery trying to rebuild his life. That all happened when I happened to be making hip hop content for NBC and could get crews and budgets together and stuff. So I started first for NBC, but then later on my own filming his recovery. It was supposed to originally be in the freestyle documentary, but then when we briefly lost those rights, I just said, fuck it, I don't need these guys' permission to help my bro out and tell this story. So went and made the whole movie, and then later got the footage back and worked it back into the movie and stuff. So like that's another one where it's like, you know what I mean? Like those just were things I was involved in, opportunities where all of a sudden I'm like, I got passionate about something. There wasn't like a grand plan. With music, it's different because with music, you know, I write these little song ideas and kind of, you know, because I've been doing this for a long time, I have a few different musical projects. So if I write a bunch of punk rock songs, okay, those are probably going to work out to be Streetwalkin Cheetahs songs. And the Streetwalkin Cheetahs have some infrastructure here. We've got labels we work with and booking agents, and we can go tour and stuff, support that material. If I write a bunch of stuff that's kind of more AC/DC, heavy metal, hard rock, that goes to my European band, Trading Aces, and then I go over to Europe and promote that stuff. If I'm working with another artist, it might be over here. You know, if I'm doing a solo record, I'm kind of trying to stay in a different lane that's not what I'm already doing, because what's the point of making a solo record if it sounds like my other bands, you know?
Right.
And I guess it's a per K basis. You know, the best songs are the ones that you walk around humming, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I love hooks. So if I write a hook and, you know, I'm sitting around humming that hook later, that to me is a good indicator that there's a song in there. If I kind of write it and I forget about it, then that's usually an indicator it's probably a forgettable idea. So the ones that stick with me as a listener to some extent, you know, and I have a home studio, so when I have song ideas, I kind of demo them out and then give myself a little space from them and then just listen to them. And if I go, oh man, that's a great song, then I work on it and I try to find a home for it. If I kind of listen and go, you know, then it goes into the hard drive.
So one more for you. Are there any, you do film, TV, music, books. Is there any overarching theme that comes across through all of those?
Interesting. I mean, I guess as far as my music goes, I mean, well, okay. So my books and my films have all, for the most part, been nonfiction. Meaning, I mean, I've written some scripts along the way, and I've done some you know, comedy stuff and other things along the way because I've been doing this for a long time. But for the most part, the stuff that's been released, the stuff that people know about, the stuff that people have seen, my books, you know, they're nonfiction books. They're either autobiographies or biographies about musicians, or in a couple cases, I've worked with like photographers and helped them put together like their sort of coffee table books and done interviews or whatever content goes into that. And then I've written a few like self-help books for fathers. But all that stuff is nonfiction. The movies I've done are all documentary movies, so it's kind of fly on the wall stuff. So it's hard to say there's really a theme besides, for the most part, I guess, music. You know, music and fatherhood. Those are the two things I've written the most about, I guess, or done films. As far as my music goes, you know, like I said, it's like my taste in movies. I love action movies and horror movies and comedies and offbeat films and indie films. So my music tends to reflect that overall sensibility in between. Certainly when I'm doing rock and roll stuff, there tends to be a lot of sex and violence and drugs and craziness and rebelling teenagers and outlaws and, you know, shoot 'em ups and mayhem and chaos and disorder and all that fun stuff. If I'm And I don't mean that everything I write like that is like that. I would say there tends to be a lot of that stuff, or I tend to write these very succinct power pop songs. I'm a huge fan of Cheap Trick, and every band I have, every album always has one or two really, really kind of like solid pop rock and roll songs with like just hooks. So it tends to be kind of these like fun love songs or extreme violence. However, on Living Between the Lines, which is the solo record that's coming out, I kind of really did try to be more personal in terms of actually telling my story and some of my background, talking about my family. I had some heavy stuff go down in the last year, a little over a year. My mom passed away, her husband, my stepdad, passed away. I was very involved in all that stuff, and I was feeling as I was writing all this material that it would be like almost irresponsible of me not to like somehow as a songwriter address all this heavy shit that was actually going on in my life, instead of like, oh, I'll just write about a car crash instead. It's like, well,
does it make you too vulnerable?
No, because I mean that's kind of what music is for, you know. I mean, you can be as vulnerable or not vulnerable as you want in music, and like I said, I sometimes write these songs that are very like kind of these action-packed fantasies, but along the way, I'm always writing songs about myself and my heart and being kind of hung out to dry emotionally or whatever the sentiment is at that time. I would say on this one, I'm definitely much more specific and personal than before, but it doesn't make me feel vulnerable. It just makes me feel like a human being. If anything, I feel like as a writer, it's helping me become a more well-rounded writer by not always being in my comfort zone of like, let me just write about something that sounds fun. You know what I mean?
No, I get you. If fans want to find Frank Meyer, can you give us your socials and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Threads and all the stuff. It's always the Frank Meyer, TheFrankMeyer. I'm out on the road constantly these days. You can catch me with the Streetwalkin Cheetahs. You can catch me as Frank Meyer doing dates for my solo tour. I also play in the band Fear, the legendary hardcore band Fear, and I also play in Handsome Dick Manitoba, the singer of the Dictators, legendary New York band. So Manitoba's on tour throughout this whole year. Fear's on tour. I'm on tour solo. Cheetahs are on tour, going to Europe, going to the States. Anyone watching this, come say hi. Let's drink a beer.
So no excuse not to go. You're playing literally everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, literally, I've been playing a lot. It's like careful what you wish for. A couple years ago, when I was kind of trying to get out of like doing these sort of day jobs at TV networks and production companies, I was like, man, I just want to tour more. And now I've got like 200 tour dates this year.
Hi, this is Chad Nicefield.
And this is Justin Press.
We're the host of Making Waves, the Shiprock podcast, a part of the Sound Talent Media Podcast Network. We're inviting you to sail away with us on an epic journey in musical enlightenment. Every week, we bring you only the best artists in rock music and discuss everything from the cruise to the stage to the saga of being a professional recording artist. We'll have lots of special guests along the way, so tune in every week.
Your stateroom is available every Monday morning, so welcome aboard.